And welcome to another week of BodyWise Talks. And I am Susana, and I'm a licensed mental health counselor, board certified dance movement therapist. And these talks are just designed to um, just share some wisdom about how embodied practices can really support our overall well being, our mental health, our physical health. And today we're talking about moving through depression. A little bit more about me. I am the founder of BodyWise Psychotherapy, which where we go beyond traditional talk therapy to give you an embodied approach to counseling. Welcome in. Say hello in the chat. We're live here on Facebook. You can go ahead and like my page on Facebook, BodyWise Psychotherapy, and I'm also on Instagram, where you can come and check out all my content, BodyWise Psychotherapy as well. All right, so today we're going to be talking a little bit about what is depression, some common symptoms of depression. We're also going to be discussing some strategies to help cope with depressive symptoms. And then finally, we always end these BodyWise talks with a embodied practice that you can practice on your own with us here live later on when you're watching this, and on your own throughout the week. I encourage everyone to practice these. So you can go back and look at the former BodyWise talks and see what other embodied practices I've shared. I also share the clips of the embodied practices in my Instagram, so you can go right to those and check those out. All right. So I hope everyone's having a lovely Monday. I think depression is an interesting topic because it's really about a lot of times it's about pain, it's about hurt, it's about discomfort, it's about sadness. Although common misconception that depression is always expressed as sadness. That's not always the case. Sometimes it can look like anger. Sometimes it can look like frustration. But we're going to talk a little bit about what those symptoms are and how to cope. Okay, so if you're watching this now or you're watching this later, either way, I encourage you to like, share, and also drop a comment if you have ever experienced depression yourself. What was it like? If you feel like sharing, what are some of the things that you felt, some of the things that you struggled with even, and even some of the things that helped you. What are some of the things that were helpful for you? And I'd love to build a little discussion around that. So share your wisdom. Hello, Vanessa. Welcome, welcome. We're just getting started talking about depression today. So yeah, depression is very much a common experience, although it doesn't always look the same for everyone. Hi, Yuli, welcome. I want to start by making some distinctions here, right? So depression, I often tell clients that depression is almost like the common cold of mental health. I think oftentimes some might experience depression just as a completely natural response to what's going on in their lives. I think in mental health, we have a tendency to pathologize, really focus on what's wrong, on making mental imbalances, I guess you can say, wrong or bad or a problem. And there's definitely a challenge there. But I also like to offer a non-pathological view of depression, meaning depression is simply a natural response to stressors in life. Sometimes it makes sense, right, for one to feel down and out about the many problems that might be going on in one's life, and that's okay. So with that said, there's also ways to get yourself out of that. Much like the common cold, right? There's remedies. There's medicine that you can take. You might, drink some tea. Hello, Alexis. Welcome in. You might plenty of rest. You might drink some good old fashioned chicken soup, right? So it's the same thing with depression. There are things you can do to feel better so that it passes. Now, with that being said, that is not always the case for everyone. Some people deal with chronic depression, right? Depression that is long lasting and never seems to quite go away, right? So we're talking about maybe there's major depression where, in the DSM, which is the book that therapists and psychiatrists and psychologists use to kind of have a common language about diagnoses. The criteria is, have you had a depressive episode? So a depressive episode is characterized by lasting 2 weeks, at least 2 weeks, in which you experience a certain number of the criteria of depression. So some of the things that we experience, right? Sleep can be affected, either oversleeping or not sleeping enough, right? So a change in your usual sleep pattern, a change in your usual appetite. Has it increased more than usual or decreased more than usual? Hi, Myra. Welcome. Happy Monday. Say hello in the chat, guys. Tap the screen, share the live, do all those things. Thank you. So other symptoms of depression. We might be dealing with a heaviness in the body. A lot of times people say, I feel heavy, right? So coming from an embodied approach, right? There's a lethargy, right? Low energy that's often characterized as a symptom of depression. Just feeling like you just can't move. There's a sedentary stillness, a heaviness that comes along with depression. Definitely low energy, which in turn spills into not having the energy to be productive, not having the energy to do, right? So oftentimes I tell clients, well, it's okay to be. It's okay to just embrace being right now until this passes, right? In the same way that you might not, if someone has a cold and they're feeling very ill, you might not tell them, push through and get things done. You'll tell them, stop and rest. And I find that oftentimes with depression, that can be the approach that you take, right? Let it pass, rest. Okay. The other things that you might feel, another criteria of depression is a slowness in motor movements, which was tied to that low energy, right? But it's a way that we characterize depression. So, you may not be moving literally. The way that you move your body may not be as fast. It might be very slow, right? And I think of that meme and that character, the sloth, right? We might feel like a sloth sometimes, right? Moving very slowly, almost like we're moving through mud or moving through molasses. And that's oftentimes what it can feel like, which can be very frustrating if you're, have the desire to accomplish something or get something done, right? Imagine wanting to get something done, but you have to move so slowly, right? So that's oftentimes something that people might feel. Now on the cognitive side, when we look at the thoughts, oftentimes there's a sense of hopelessness. There can be a sadness there. Sometimes in some cases, there's some thoughts about death even, right? So thoughts about suicidal ideation can be a part of it. Hello, Natalie, welcome. We're talking about depression and the symptoms that are oftentimes characterized with depression. Welcome. And so, it could be passing thoughts of, not really wanting to be here, things like that, as well as, some more active thoughts about, of not wanting to be alive, so that's really an aspect of depression. Happy Monday. Thank you. All right. You can relate. Yeah. So, So, and of course, a disclaimer here, right? If you're experiencing any of these things, reach out to someone, and we'll talk about when we get into how do we cope with these things, right? We'll talk about the importance of socializing, of reaching out to others, right? When we're feeling that way. There can also be another criteria of depression is isolation. It's isolation. We tend to withdraw from social interaction when we're depressed, right? And I think my view, and I think it's not just my view, but I agree with this view, is that um, oh, there we go. We're back. There we go. My view is that, it's a protective thing. It's a protective thing. So if we look at depression of an imbalance in our energy, and we know that that energy can be transferred, and we can pick up on other people's cues, and we actually also know that mental health can be contagious, much like physical illness. Um, then it makes sense that there can be a tendency to withdraw whenever one feels down now, as to protect others, right? And oftentimes, I don't know if anybody has experienced it. I know I have, right? When you're feeling down, it's like, I don't want to be a burden to others, right? I don't want others to feel what I'm feeling. And that's, in a way, a very altruistic thing, right? Like, we want to spare others from the discomfort of depression, right? So we isolate. Although it could also come from just negative self-talk and poor self-esteem in that moment, right? Obviously, that can also be an aspect. I also want to make the point that there's a difference. There's different forms of depression, right? Sometimes it could be seasonal for some. It could come and go. And for some, it could be throughout long term, right? Major depression. There's also like a kind of a passing, very low intensity, but it's kind of always in the background type of depression called um, dysthymic disorder, which is just like you're generally always a little bit depressed, right? And so there's that form, that manifestation of depression as well. Um, and there's a distinction also between depression and grief, and I want to make that distinction as well, right? So it's one thing to grieve a loss when perhaps there's a death, or a major loss of an aspect of your identity, a breakup, things like that. Any major loss in your life, and you're going through a temporary or transitional period of grief. It's different. The way that we approach, as mental health professionals, the way that we approach grief is different than how we would approach clinical depression. See, there's a difference there. One might lean more towards a chemical imbalance that has become maybe a pattern in that person's mind body energy system, um, as opposed to grief, meaning that's even more so a natural response to a loss, and you just kind of have to hold that. So we kind of hold space for that a little bit different in the field of psychotherapy. Okay. I think I've been grieving for months. Oh, yes. Yeah. Yeah. And so it's a process, and everybody grieves differently. And there's, we can do a whole other body talk on that. So yes. So yeah, so those are some of the criteria of depression. I want to shift into now, like, how do we treat it, right? How do we cope? And I always say that, we don't use the word cure in psychotherapy. We talk about coping, right? Because it's not about selling this idea that there's like this cure that we can completely get rid of something, because that's totally subjective. Can some people overcome mental illness and live up and thrive? And yes, absolutely you can. And although I do, use the diagnostic model and approach, and in my work as a psychotherapist, I also very much am aware of the ways in which diagnoses we can over pathologize people, really over focus on the problem rather than on the beauty of each individual and their capability to thrive and be resilient, right? And I can go into all of that, and I think that would be a great topic for us to do one day here, and talk about how not only is diagnosis pathologizing, but the way in which systematic oppression informs over pathology of people. But shifting back into depression and how we so I want to pull a little bit from DBT, dialectical behavior therapy. Those of you that know me in the psychotherapy world and as a psychotherapist know that one of the main principles that I use in my approach is DBT, and in specific, what I call embodied DBT, which is basically just an embodied view or approach of this form of therapy. Meaning, I very much focus on the body, right? So, one of the lovely approaches to sadness, hello, welcome, is opposite to emotion is now called. It used to be called opposite action. This is a skill. And the idea is if you're feeling sad, and there's one for each emotion, but I'm only going to talk about sadness today. If you're feeling sad and the action urge is to, like we said, all those symptoms of depression, right? Maybe isolate, not do anything, feel low energy, maybe withdraw from people. Then the opposite of that would be to get active, start to move in some way, and reach out to people, right? So that's why I've titled this talk Moving Through Depression, because it may not be that you are able to be as productive or get things done and all of that when you're feeling down, but moving just a little bit at a time. And I often think of the turtle, which is one of my spiritual totems here. I often think of the turtle, slow and steady wins the race. And I think that that's such a parable for depression. I think that oftentimes it's not about how much you're getting done with depression, but it's about the idea that, not the idea, but the fact that when we literally move our bodies, okay, we are activating some energy there, okay, and we're starting to combat the those symptoms of depression that can be very heavy and draining. Okay, so that can look different for everybody. For somebody suffering from major depression and it's quite severe in the middle of a depressive episode, getting up and putting on pants could be all they do in that day, and that is great, and that's a celebration, and that is an accomplishment, right? And it's about small incremental progress, right? Gradual, steady progress. Okay, so that's one embodied approach to coping with depression. The other thing that I want to share is, and I didn't make this up, and I don't know who did, but but this acronym called DOSE, DOSE, and so it's quite handy because it's a way of accessing. So each letter stands for the happy hormones, the happy chemicals in our body that help us access joy, right? So D stands for dopamine, O stands for oxytocin. S stands for serotonin, and E stands for endorphins. Okay, so if we use this acronym, we can find that there are ways to access each one of these happy chemicals. Okay, so for example, oxytocin, we know that it is the bonding hormone. Okay, so a simple way of accessing that hormone is through touch. So try it right now, right? Just like even just placing a hand somewhere on your body where you're feeling maybe some tenderness or some heaviness, right? Just placing a hand there and breathing into it, giving yourself a big hug. One way that I access oxytocin on a daily basis is through this guy right here. I don't know if you guys could see him. See that guy right there? Your pets, right? Your pets are always there and willing if you have any. If you don't have anyone around you, you don't have any pets, maybe you go to a pet store that day, right? Try to get to a pet store, try to get to a petting zoo. Also, just making any kind of eye contact is very helpful for oxytocin. It helps you access that. So maybe reaching out to someone, hearing someone's voice, all of those things are ways, right, that we can still access that chemical, or just giving yourself that touch. Okay, hand massage, right? Massaging your temples, things like that. Okay. D is dopamine. One way that we can access dopamine is by completing a task. So again, if you can just give yourself 3 tasks to complete that day. Simple task, especially if you're feeling very heavy that day. Something simple like I brushed my teeth, I made that call that I had to make or something like that. And I swept my house, right? And you feel so accomplished after you complete a simple task. Right? So give yourself those tasks to complete every day, and notice how you feel after. It's like, I did it. And when you feel that sense of accomplishment in that moment, that's dopamine coursing through your body, that happy hormone. Okay. The other one is serotonin, which we get from being outside. Go outside. Our body releases chemical serotonin when we are around nature, around trees. It's scientifically proven that when we are around plants and trees, our body releases these chemicals that help us feel good, get some sunlight, right? Breathe that fresh air. Okay. If you can, take a walk. Okay. But even if it's just getting outside and spending some moments out there, then that's enough, right? It's about those incremental, gradual steps when it comes to depression. Okay. And then the last one is endorphins, physical. Again, so that proves that opposite action, get active, skill from DBT. Endorphins are released whenever we move our bodies, right? So whether it's doing a bit of yoga, whether it's taking a walk, whether it's just stretching. Hi, Christian. Welcome. Hi. Whether it's putting on some music and just dancing for a few minutes, whether it's doing some push-ups, whatever the case may be. It doesn't have to be a full workout. It can be, but any kind of activity releases those endorphins, which help us feel happy. Okay. So I hope those strategies were helpful for today. And now we're going to shift into actually practicing here with me live, right? And if you're watching this later, practice, right? I think practice makes progress, right? When it comes to mental health. It's not always about remembering to practice skills in the moment when you're triggered or when you're already feeling, some kind of symptom, but it's about practicing even when you feel well, right? So that we can have that motor memory and that sense of mastery that helps us access these resources with a little bit more efficiency, right? When we need them. Okay. So for today's embodied practice, it's quite simple. So I'm going to ask everyone to start in a seated position. Yes, and get comfortable. And if it feels all right with you, closing the eyes and just taking a few breaths, tuning into yourself. Breathing deeply and just saying hello to yourself. Acknowledging how you feel in this moment. And we're going to bring the palms of the hands together and just start to rub the palms of the hands together, feeling that friction, that connection, that sensation of touch, warmth. And you're going to take your hands and you're just going to start to nice and gently take your fingertips and start to just sweep your face with your fingertips, if that feels okay. Maybe around the edges of your face, eyebrows, your nose. And as you do this, keep breathing and just offering yourself tenderness and love. And maybe you say some kind of self-love affirmation. I love you. Everything's going to be okay. It's okay that you feel a bit tired today. You can just be today. Everything's going to be all right. You are enough. Whatever comes to you from that place of self-nurturance, self-love. And then starting to press a little bit more pressure around the temples, giving yourself a massage, breathing. Maybe moving down to the jaw. And as you breathe out, maybe sighing with that exhale. Bringing your hands to your heart space, just placing the palms there and feeling your heartbeat. Drinking in that oxytocin as we give ourselves some love, some self-touch, some compassion. Sighing with every breath. That feels okay. And shifting into a stretch, moving the arms up, stretching the arms, reaching up above the head. And maybe pulling down towards you what you want to achieve. I just want some joy today. I just want some peace. Maybe it's something specific, like I just want to be able to get some tasks done today. I want to be able to rest today. Yeah, and just reaching, grasping, pulling towards you, gathering what it is that you need to feel better. Just gently moving your arms. Maybe we lean over to one side and stretch. Opening up that lateral part of the body. Stretching to the other side. Yes. Coming back to a neutral position, placing the hands on your lap. And we're just going to do a little bit of a seated cat-cow here. So as we inhale, we arch, look up, opening the chest. And as we exhale, we curve the spine, bring the chin to the chest. And just do that 2 more times at your own pace. One more. Coming back to a neutral position, opening the eyes if they were closed all this time. And so we just did some simple movements. Remember, less is more, right? When we're trying to just move through depression. And that concludes our talk for today. Thank you so much for those that joined in live. I appreciate you so much. Remember to interact with these lives if it feels right to you. Like, share, comment, and know that I'll be here every Monday. Next week, we're going to be talking about trauma at 11 a.m. Eastern on Instagram and Facebook. And I appreciate you all so much. Mwah. Look out for just some posts and clips from today's live throughout the week. And I'll see you guys next time. Okay, thank you. Bye. Bye, love. See you guys.